Hey, Zerman listeners, let's continue watching the video on YouTube called Andrew Tate Goes to Therapy on the Cobra Conquer YouTube channel. I am thoroughly, I don't know if enjoying is the right word, but it's been fascinating watching this video, this therapy session, and commenting on it. I don't know, this has been a very rewarding process for me. Let's continue watching.
Ask yourself the question, like, what would happen if you let go of trying to control everything? Just feel into what that would feel like.
But that goes back to the point about what vulnerability is, because I don't think humans are as emotionally incontinent as they pretend to be. And I believe that when you truly feel pain or truly...
Emotionally incontinent. So I think he's saying, I believe that true humans or better humans don't leak their emotions as often as they,
You feel trauma or something really bad happens to you, the result to that is usually silence. I don't think you talk very much at all. So people, you ask me, what is it like to be vulnerable? Well, to me, that's not crying. That's not, I think when anyone's doing that, 99% of the time, it's a manipulation tactic.
Yeah, so, he's still spouting his ridiculous notions about emotion. I don't need to point out how ridiculous it is. It's a reflection of society. Andrew Tate is a reflection of society. He did not emerge out of nowhere. He is a product of our misogynistic, sexist society. It might look like, I was about to say he's an exaggeration, but he isn't really. There are plenty of people of various genders who are worse than him, but they don't have a YouTube channel. They just live their lives and harm themselves and other people. So he's not unique in that way. He's unique or somewhat rare in that he seemingly isn't afraid to lean into it and to talk about it. So I don't know why I'm saying that. Well, I'm saying that because I want everyone to remind, I guess I'm reminding myself, and we can all remind ourselves that, we can attack Andrew Tate. We might even be able to get him in prison or cancel him or whatever. That does not solve the problem. We have a massive problem. Why does anyone respect him? Why does anyone think he's a genius? That's not because Andrew Tate somehow coerced everyone into believing his nonsense. It's because we as a society had already been telling young boys these notions subtly and not so subtly, and also telling them that they can't have those points of view, which is a good thing, but we injected them with the feelings and the notions and the ideas and the oppressive ideologies to begin with, and then attacked them. And then Andrew Tate comes along and starts spouting it and doesn't seem to be afraid of it, and so people flock to him. It's all of our fault. It's society's fault. So we can get rid of Andrew Tate, but we're not going to get rid of the problem.
I believe, personally. Maybe that's just my personal experience. But yeah, maybe. But I think especially with men, I think it's a manipulation tactic when they try and show too much emotion, and women do it as well. And I don't react very well to it. If someone were to sit in front of me and start bawling their eyes out, it's very hard to elicit sympathy from me for that reason. I feel like you get sympathy from me by sitting and explaining to me why something bad happened to you in a logical, calm, stoic manner. If someone starts crying in front of me, I feel like they're trying to manipulate me, and I don't buy it.
Or maybe you judge it in them because you judge that in yourself.
Perhaps. I mean, it's my human experience.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time praising David, knowing what I now know about him. But yeah, that was a very concise therapy thing to say. And it was great that Andrew agreed. I don't know how much he actually agrees, but he's at least allowing for it to happen. And David said, essentially what he's saying is something that I would think or say, which is, okay, when anyone cries in front of you, you judge them and you have concluded that they're weak or something and they're manipulating you. And what is probably actually happening is that you're judging yourself for having emotions, and when other people are expressing emotions, normally you're, through projective identification or projection, you're actually judging them, but really you're judging yourself. And it probably comes from when you were a childhood. David said something earlier, it's like, was your mom emotionally manipulative? And that would never be a question that I would ask, because emotionally manipulative, I find those phrases to be extremely reductionistic and simplistic. On TikTok and on the internet, you'll hear these phrases, oh, this person is emotionally manipulative. I have, once people describe what they're referring to when they say emotionally manipulative, it's across the board. There's so many different scenarios that I would call other sorts of things. And so I wouldn't ask that question. I would say something like, well, how were emotions dealt with in your family growing up? How did your dad express emotion? How did he react to you when you had emotion? How did your dad react to your brother or to your mom with emotion? And, you know, everyone.
Experience, right? And it's my bias.
Right.
But I'm trying to think of the very few scenarios in which I would ever cry. And I'm thinking, would it genuinely be because I feel so much pain, or if I think it could benefit me or help me? Would I be trying to manipulate somebody? Now, that's not something I'd ever do because it's not my personality and mental frame, but
crying is just a physiological reaction to express pain and grief that allows us to release this and to come back to home.
I don't understand how David and I could think so similarly and yet think so differently. It's such a weird contradiction, but of course, you know, thinking like Andrew Tate doesn't mean that you can't, although it is weird that David is saying some very familiar things to me. And it's not me, it's just a lot of therapists and others would think this way. David's not, and I'm not unique in this way, but it's weird that he could be, I think, right, or at least in my ballpark philosophically about emotion and a lot of things about therapy, seemingly from the little bit that I've seen, but also believe that women are inherently illogical and that anyone I don't know if I showed this clip, but they were basically saying that anyone attacking Andrew Tate was jealous. They were both agreeing that anyone who criticizes Andrew Tate is jealous of him. You know, any man who criticizes is jealous. Any woman who criticizes is both jealous and they want to sleep with him. And I'm just thinking, no, I mean, maybe, but I criticize Andrew Tate. I don't want to sleep with him, and I'm not jealous of him at all. There's nothing about his life. I mean, if someone wants his lifestyle, okay, but there's nothing about his lifestyle that I envy in the least. You couldn't pay me enough money to live the kind of life that, even the little bits that I've seen about his life, it's just completely against what I value and what I would want in my life day to day. Anyway, the reason why I criticize him is because the ideas that he has are not unique to him. They are old ideas about gender and emotion and humanness that are harmful to humans, including Andrew Tate and everyone else who follows him. I imagine there are probably some things in Andrew Tate. I've already heard some things from Andrew Tate, even in this, that I thought, well, that could be a good thing to tell other people to think this way, to reframe things or whatever. But so I'm not saying everything he says like this, but there are some things that he says that are harmful to everyone, including Andrew Tate. Like, Andrew Tate's perspective, I am 99.9% sure, harms him perhaps even more than it harms other people. Because for him, even in this one tiny example of his perspective where he thinks that emotions are weak and manipulative, and he's even saying for himself, I don't show emotion, or I don't have emotion or something. The amount of damage that is having on his personality and on his relationships is tremendous. Even if he's a psychopath, even if you believe he's a psychopath. I've worked with psychopaths, and part of helping them to manage their behavior is to manage their emotions. And part of managing their emotions is for them to allow themselves to have healthy expressions of emotions. So even if he's a psychopath, but regardless, anyone with any sort of issue or disorder to say to themselves, all emotion is manipulative, is not only harmful to other people because they judge others, but it's just harmful to themselves. So that's why I'm criticizing him, not because I'm jealous of him or I want him to go away necessarily. I just want everyone, his followers, everyone who knows about him, himself included, I have compassion for humans, and I would just want everyone to allow themselves to be human.
Homeostasis.
It's manipulation.
It's just, well, it can be.
It's don't attack me
but
anymore.
It's also a physiological response.
Oh, completely. But it's don't attack me anymore. It's I'm the victim, don't attack me anymore.
Can be.
Yes, I cheated on you. Don't live. It's a shield. And so when we talk about what does vulnerable mean, I feel like
interesting that his one example of crying is when someone cheats and then is caught. That's the only example that he can come up with in which someone might cry.
I'm being vulnerable now when I'm explaining things extremely logically.
You are.
That's as vulnerable as I can be.
It's not logical. It is logical to acknowledge emotion because that is scientifically and biologically relevant and coherent to acknowledge emotion. Emotions are a part of reality. This notion that logic is the opposite of emotion, you know, like with Star Trek and Vulcans and Data, so that's not the way humans operate. It is logical to be emotional. When a friend of mine were to call me a bad name or to insult me and I feel hurt, it is logical that I feel hurt. When I am watching Step Brothers with Will Ferrell, John C. Reilly, and I'm laughing, that is an emotion of laughter and joy and enjoyment. It is logical that I feel that emotion. It would be illogical for me to shut down the emotion or to deny the emotion. It is logical to feel emotions. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So I don't know about you, but throughout my day, I have two opposing forces in my mind between what I want to do, like playing a video game or playing with my dogs, and what I should do, like exercise more or eat more fiber or something. As a therapist, I talk with a lot of clients about this inner conflict. Most people think it's all about willpower, even though research demonstrates that willpower doesn't really work. There are a lot of evidence-based techniques that actually work that people don't usually consider, like using behavioral shaping techniques or healing from our relational traumas that keep us stuck internally. Well, one option worth exploring is BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's worth giving a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and suited to your schedule. And also, you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge. So, make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Not be the kind of person who's going to cry. But once again, this is my mental model. I haven't instilled.
But is that what it means? Vulnerability, cry?
I guess vulnerability.
What about admitting your weaknesses?
I'll admit my weaknesses
right now. What are your weaknesses?
Okay. So it's interesting that he would even say that. Well, of course he would, because he has to give this notion that he's in control of everything. And I think he knows that it would be illogical or a sign of weakness that he can't recognize that he has weaknesses. But he's really in a bind here, I'm guessing, backed into a corner. He backed himself into the corner. So let's see how he digs himself out.
Then this is so interesting because I will tell you, no, it is, because I'll tell.
So I interpret that, what we just saw, and I'll rewind it, as his brain glitching because he wants to be a part of his relationship with David. He respects David enough and allows David to influence him enough to introduce the idea that he has weaknesses. And then he's like, okay, I have weaknesses. And then okay, what are they? And then he glitched because that defense, he can't tolerate even the thought of thinking about his weaknesses, let alone saying them. Let's rewatch.
This vulnerability.
What about admitting your weaknesses?
I'll admit my weaknesses right now.
What are your weaknesses?
Then this is so interesting because I will tell you. No, it is because I'll.
You see the gears turning. It's interesting to see. And just to demonstrate, I have a lot of weaknesses. One weakness is that I talk too much with my wife. I yammer too much. I explain things too much. My stories are too long. It's a weakness. I'm bothering other people. I don't notice, or I put too many words in. Some of you might even think this about me in these videos. Like, Kirk, just get to the point. And it's a weakness. Absolutely a weakness. I have many other weaknesses. So the reason why I'm saying this right now is because I want to demonstrate how easy it is for people who have been through a lot of therapy or who have been raised well to very quickly admit that they have a weakness. It's human to have weaknesses. It's normal. It's okay. I'm not ashamed of it. I feel guilty. I feel bad. I'm working on it. I have worked on it, but I still do it. And I feel bad. I'm trying not to. And that's a weakness. It's not only a weakness I have it, it's a weakness that I can't fix it, that I can't change it. It's a lot of weaknesses involved. It's not hard to admit that you have weaknesses.
Tell you I'll admit my weaknesses. Yeah. And I will. Mm-hmm. But now I have to try and identify some because in my mental framework, I don't have weaknesses.
Right.
So now it's like, okay, I am prepared to admit where I'm weak. Where am I weak? Well, I've tried so hard for so long to make sure I'm not weak anywhere. And if I am, I've compensated so heavily in some other way.
It's interesting to see him run in circles around this. I think there's a part of him that knows he should talk about his weaknesses, or that it would be healthy for him. Has that look to it? Because he talks a lot, and that's what he does for a living, and so he undoubtedly has 1,000 things he could say right now to change the subject or to frame it in his shtick. But he's not doing that. He is, I mean, kind of, but he's lingering in the zone that he might have weaknesses. So I think there's a part of him that's like, I think I should. And then he's talking about the barriers. He's saying, well, I can't really talk about weaknesses because my whole thing is to deny my weaknesses. He's not saying it directly, but basically what he's saying. It's interesting. And, and maybe I'll do an intro at the beginning of this to kind of set the stage, which I don't normally do because I usually just start it up and react, but I might put this at the beginning and say something like, the purpose of these videos that I'm making is a way for us to understand ourselves and people like both of these individuals, people like David, people like Andrew Tate. Instead of just, because we can cancel or jail Andrew Tate, but you might have someone in your life like this. You might have a child, one of your teens might be like him. You might have a spouse. You might be kind of like this, or you might have tendencies in this direction. So that's the benefit of us evaluating this, really, and looking at it and wondering how we can help people like this and figuring it out instead of just saying like, oh, Andrew Tate, cancel, which we could do. But, again, people in our lives, we might not be able to do that. So we want to understand it. Where does it come from? And what are the roads to wellness?
Fail. So it's like, where am I weak? I'm that guy who does not fail. It doesn't matter what scenario anybody's life is in. It doesn't matter if you get dumped into jail. It doesn't matter if you're going into war. It doesn't matter if you're bankrupt. Whatever it is, if someone says Tate's on your side, you feel good. Oh, Tate's here. Ah, Tate, okay.
Yeah.
He can't even swim, but he's here to he's the lifeguard. Tate doesn't fail. I can swim, but it's an example.
It's an interesting metaphor. And, he said a few things about people depending on him, within his misogynistic framework, about how all these women depend on him and all these kids depend on him. And at first I thought he was talking about kids like the internet, which he also talks about, but I think he might also be talking about his own offspring. I don't know. But he seems to have kind of a complex about that dependency. I think he wants to be depended on, but has a complicated relationship with that. And then his metaphor is, or what he's saying is like, everyone understands that when Andrew Tate is here, they're comforted. And I have to say, I think most people would not, if they knew anything about him, would not be like, oh, hallelujah, Andrew Tate is on the scene. He's going to solve all of our problems. I just can't imagine that being what people would think. But that's his point of view, and maybe he's experienced that in his life. But there's a theme that I'm hearing in which it's him taking care of other people and kind of resenting it, and that's his purpose. Maybe that's his usefulness, and that actually could play into his whole content provision in that he maybe ventured into content making as with a little bit of misogyny, but then a lot of the boys and men who are looking for some kind of answer, some way out of the woods, since they've already been indoctrinated into misogyny, he actually morphed himself. I think Donald Trump kind of did this as well, because throughout his life, he has drastically changed his political views and other kinds of views. And for people, they might come across like they're very sure of themselves and they have everything figured out, but they actually deep down might actually be just morphing who they are to feel useful to other people. And that's how they gain their sense of security, is that people need them. And so there seems to be a theme around that for him. I wonder about his childhood in that respect of overfunctioning, codependency, of parentification. His dad was, it sounds like, at least prone to anger, maybe temper, maybe abuse, at the very least was scary to him. and he at least has one brother, I think a twin brother, I'm not sure. So who knows, but it's possible that at some point people came to him, maybe even his own mom came to him, maybe even his own dad when they were young, when Andrew Tate was young. And he has that as part of his pathway to safety and security. Is my way to feel like I can sleep at night is if people think that I'm useful. And it's also wrapped up in his other parts of his personality. Because, you know, narcissistic individuals aren't necessarily overfunctioners, but they can be. So it just makes me wonder.
I do not fail ever. So it's very hard for me to identify weaknesses because I feel like they've all been ruthlessly, I think I've rooted out any weakness, or I've compensated so heavily so long ago. I don't.
So he's worked his way back to the narcissistic defensive structure that he doesn't fail, that he has never made a mistake, and you know, he doesn't have any weaknesses. Remember, this all started with him acknowledging, I have weaknesses. Okay, what are they? And now we're here. And this is just run-of-the-mill therapy. I've been in so many conversations and sessions with clients that are on the narcissistic spectrum, whether it's actual narcissism, you know, narcissistic personality, or they're immature or undifferentiated or particularly lacking in awareness, or they have psychopathy or some other. There's a lot of personality disorders that can result in this, but you know, regardless of the exact conceptualization or label, I've been in this position a lot of times where I can manage to get someone to admit to themselves that they have vulnerability, that they have weaknesses, and giving me an opportunity to provide them a corrective experience by saying, like, it's okay that you have this and you're still a good person. There's nothing to be ashamed of. That's what I'm hoping for. But they don't give me that opportunity, and they very quickly, so they kind of admit something, but then they very quickly get to a place where I'm seeing the defensive structure emerge. And the way that this is presenting, I think him admitting that he has weaknesses, and him, when his gears were turning, having to actually maybe even glimpse some of his weaknesses. Maybe some of his weaknesses emerged in that moment slightly. And it was so threatening to him that he very quick, you know, that mode of his very quickly kicked in. And we hear this sort of exaggerated, I'm perfect and superior language.
I see myself as a weak person. I don't see myself as a person who can fail. People said to me in jail, how did you handle that? What else can I do? Not handle it? What does that look like? I'm gonna bang my head on the wall like a dummy? Am I gonna have a breakdown and just be a pile of mush? All you can do is handle it. So you were talking about vulnerability. I'm being as vulnerable as I can, but I can't even honestly sit here and tell you a weakness I have, because in my mind I have no weaknesses. And perhaps that's delusion. Perhaps that's perhaps.
So the way that it's interesting, this video is giving me an opportunity to think and talk about things that I don't think I've ever talked about on this channel before. There's a lot of experiences as a therapist that you acquire that you might not actually ever have a chance to articulate or be reminded of to even talk about when you're even talking with consultants or whatnot. So this moment reminds me of something that happens a lot in therapy, regardless of the context, where I'm working real hard. Therapy can often be a wrestling match, a struggle. One way to frame it is I'm actually trying to ally myself with their humanness and the healthy part of them, but this defensive mode will kick in. So me and their healthy side are wrestling with their defenses is one way to think about it, and manage to get the client or to help them to admit that they are human, to allow that healthy part of them come out for a second. And then very quickly the defense starts to kick in, but it's a ramp up, and then eventually it's really exaggerated. But then what Andrew Tate did was he sort of surmounted the hill and said, okay, I'm back to normal. I've established that I'm superior. I never make mistakes. I've never failed. I'm awesome. I just rattled off a bunch of things that, you know, are convincing at least myself that I'm superior. I've established that in my mind. And you can almost consider that he's saying this to reassure. I've never failed. I've never failed. I don't have weaknesses. I don't have weaknesses. Because I don't think David believes that. And so he's saying it. And once he gets over the hill, he can kind of take a break, because he was terrified earlier, and look around and think, oh, wait, we were talking about my weaknesses, and then he can the fact that David allowed him to go in that direction, because it'd be tempting for David in the therapist's role to say, oh, you're doing it, and maybe down the road you might be able to have the rapport enough to do that. But David lets him reestablish the narcissistic structure, and then he can breathe and then return eventually to the topic at hand, which is that he has weaknesses. So he's like barely allowing himself to express that, but very quickly saying, but I have a system in which I don't allow myself to have weaknesses. But he's kind of admitting very, very slightly that he has a weakness. That's his healthy human inner child, just barely able to sneak through the defense. All right, well, let's adjourn there. Tune in next time when I continue watching, when I continue yammering. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.